Welcome, friend. I'm James, your host, and today, we're diving into another captivating episode. Grab a drink, get comfortable, and get ready for a powerful story that's sure to resonate. If something hits home, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive in. AITA for going no contact with my mom? Hey, Reddit. Buckle up because my story is a wild ride, and honestly, I need some perspective on whether I'm in the wrong. I'm 14, and after years of turmoil, I've decided to cut my mom, let's call her S, out of my life entirely. Before I dive in, I apologize for any grammar mistakes. English isn't my first language. To understand where I'm coming from, we need to rewind the clock, even before I was born. My dad often reminisces about how vibrant and caring S was before she got pregnant with me. Picture this, a woman full of life, laughing, and radiating joy. She was the kind of person who would light up a room with her smile, always the life of the party, eager to lend a helping hand to friends and family. But then came the pregnancy, and it was as if a dark cloud descended over her life. Suddenly, she became someone I barely recognized, sitting around the house all day, nursing a grudge against my dad for working long hours to provide for us. It's ironic because she never cared about his job before. In fact, she used to brag about how hardworking he was. Their arguments escalated, each one louder and more explosive than the last, filled with words that stung like daggers. My childhood memories are filled with echoes of their fights, and I learned early on to tiptoe around the house, trying to avoid setting off another round of their angry exchanges. By the time I was 2 months old, they were done. S's anger didn't just fade, it deepened and festered. She would often reminisce about the good old days, but it always seemed to serve as a reminder of what she had lost. During her pregnancy, she completely neglected her health, smoking like a chimney, drinking wine, and feasting on fish despite knowing better. I don't remember those early years, but I've heard enough from my dad to paint a picture, a woman spiraling out of control, lost in a whirlwind of resentment and self-pity. It was heartbreaking to think that she could have had a healthy pregnancy, but instead, she chose a path that would ultimately affect our relationship in ways I would only begin to understand later. My dad would often shake his head as he shared these memories, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and frustration. He would say, "I tried everything to support her, but it was like talking to a wall." From my earliest memories, S filled my head with tales of my dad's supposed drug use and dealing. "He's a bad man," she would say, her voice dripping with venom, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made my stomach churn. The more she spoke, the more I began to question my dad, the man I loved and admired. Meanwhile, my dad, who worked at a bar and had to take regular drug tests, always passed with flying colors. Yet, in S's eyes, he was the villain, and I, her unsuspecting pawn. She painted a picture of him that was so far removed from reality, and I often felt trapped between their conflicting worlds, not knowing who to believe. It was like living in a soap opera where the characters were real and the stakes were incredibly high. As the years went by, money became an issue. S struggled financially, and she was infuriated whenever my dad bought me something she couldn't afford. I could see the bitterness etched on her face whenever she saw me in new clothes or playing with toys that my dad had bought. She would hiss, "You love him more than me," whenever she felt threatened, her voice a mixture of jealousy and desperation. Meanwhile, my dad was consistently sending her £500 a month for child support, covering my toys, clothes, and even helping her with her horse. But this only added fuel to S's fire, making her lash out even more. She would say I was spoiled, that my dad was trying to buy my love, which only made me feel more guilty. Each gift from him felt like a weapon she could use against me, twisting my love for him into something ugly in her eyes. I learned to hide the things my dad bought me, not wanting to trigger another explosion of anger from S. This secrecy became a part of my daily routine. I would stuff new clothes into the back of my closet, disguising them among the old, worn-out shirts that had seen better days. Things took a turn for the worse when my dad met my stepmom, B. Initially, S forbade me from seeing my dad until B came into the picture. It was bizarre. She suddenly needed a babysitter and dropped me off at his place, expecting me to be grateful. B tried her best to befriend S, but it never worked out. S would roll her eyes at B's attempts to connect, dismissing her as an intruder in our lives. The tension was thick, and I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air whenever we were all together. S was furious that B didn't initiate small talk, and she found any excuse to keep me from my dad, frequently reminding me of how B was not my real mom. I often found myself caught in the middle, torn between the warmth and kindness of B and the cold, resentful glare of S. The moments when B would try to embrace me felt like glimpses of sunshine breaking through the storm clouds, but I was always aware of the looming darkness behind me. I craved my dad's presence, yet I felt like I was betraying S by wanting to see him. It was a confusing time, and I often wished I could blend the two worlds together, but each attempt felt like throwing fuel on an already raging fire. The drama hit a breaking point when I was little and developed a painful diaper rash. I remember vividly the sting of the change, the feeling of betrayal when I thought someone I trusted would hurt me. One day, as my grandpa, my dad's dad, was changing me, I whimpered, "Ow, it hurts." Fast forward a few nights, and S had a nightmare that twisted my words into a monstrous accusation. She rushed to the doctors, claiming my grandpa had assaulted me. In the end, it was a complete fabrication, yet I was banned from seeing my grandpa, who I adored. My dad, however, didn't buy into S's lies and continued to let me spend time with him. But the damage was done. I began to internalize S's words, feeling ashamed and confused. It felt like a dark cloud had settled over my innocent memories, and every time I thought of my grandpa, I was reminded of the stigma and accusations that came from S. I found myself yearning for his hugs, those moments when I felt safe and loved, but I was too scared to voice my feelings, fearing that S would twist them against me. Things only worsened when my dad married B. The change in S was palpable. She became increasingly aggressive toward me, unleashing a torrent of hurtful comments that pierced my soul. I'll never forget one day when I had a tough history teacher. I was struggling and, in a moment of panic, faked S's signature on a test. When she discovered my little white lie, it unleashed a storm. "If you don't fix your grades, you'll be an alcoholic by 14, she screeched, her face twisted in rage, eyes bulging with a manic intensity. Spoiler, I'm not an alcoholic, but that didn't stop her from planting doubt in my mind. I started to feel like a failure in her eyes, and each insult chipped away at my self-esteem, making me question my worth. I feared that I would never measure up to the standards she set, and it felt like I was constantly running on a treadmill with no end in sight. The thought of disappointing her became my worst nightmare, and I would spend sleepless nights worrying about my grades, my future, and what would happen if I didn't meet her impossible expectations. The child support that was supposed to be for me? S wasted it on herself, buying a new truck, splurging on friends, and indulging in whatever whim struck her fancy. I would often see her with new clothes or taking trips, while I wore hand-me-downs or clothes from thrift stores. She even took my dad to court to raise her support, but lost and ended up with just £250 a month. I couldn't understand how she could spend money on herself while constantly complaining about not having enough for me. The disparity made me feel invisible and unworthy, as if my needs didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I felt like a ghost in my own life, haunting the hallways of my home while S continued to build her new life around me, all the while insisting she was the victim. Now, fast forward to 2020. I was at my dad's house, feeling the familiar grip of anxiety, triggered by what I thought might be a bad grade. The pressure was suffocating, and I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells. I ended up having a panic attack, and B, ever the supportive stepmom, told my dad that I couldn't go back to S in this state. It was the moment I had been waiting for, a glimmer of hope that maybe I could escape the chaos. That night, we sat down and made a decision that would change everything. I would move in with my dad. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but I also felt a pang of guilt for abandoning S, no matter how toxic our relationship had become. I wanted to scream with joy, but was instead met with a surge of anxiety that made my heart race. Would S retaliate? Would she lash out even more? The uncertainty loomed over me, but the thought of finally breaking free from her grasp was intoxicating. I texted S, straightforward as I could be, saying I wanted to live with my dad. The moment she read it, chaos erupted. She called me, her voice a tempest of fury, as if she had been holding back a tidal wave of anger all this time. "You need to get your stuff. I don't want a single thing of yours in my apartment." I could hear her breathing heavily, and it sent shivers down my spine. The sheer volume of her rage felt like a tangible force, and I braced myself for what was to come. The next day, I gathered my belongings, trying to suppress the knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. My heart raced as I packed my favorite stuffed animal and a few cherished mementos. Everything seemed calm until a week later when she showed up at my dad's place, rage radiating off her like a force field, her eyes wild with anger, filled with a fury that felt all-consuming. When she picked me up, I was gripped with fear, and she unleashed her fury the moment we were alone in the car. I don't even remember how long she screamed at me, but it felt like an eternity. "If you ever try to leave me again, you will no longer be my daughter," she bellowed, her face flushed with anger, her voice echoing in my mind long after she stopped. Her words cut deep, and I felt like a prisoner, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Every accusation, every insult felt like a dagger piercing through my heart, and all I could do was nod, tears streaming down my face. That first year after the move was hell. I would come home to my dad's, and the moment the door closed behind me, I would collapse into tears, releasing a flood of pent-up emotions. The sense of relief that flooded me when I stepped into my dad's house was quickly overshadowed by the emotional toll of my past. I would cry for what felt like 30 minutes before B would come in, concern etched on her face, wrapping her arms around me as I continued to sob into her shoulder. I felt safe in B's embrace, but the scars of my relationship with S ran deep. Each time I thought about my mom, I felt a mix of anger and sadness that left me feeling hollow inside. The comfort of my dad's house was a balm, but it could only do so much to heal the wounds S had inflicted on my spirit. Eventually, my dad brought up the idea of me moving in permanently. By that point, I had convinced myself S didn't love me anymore. Whenever I tried to express my feelings to her, she would dismiss them, claiming I was lying or imagining things. Every attempt to reach out felt futile, like shouting into a void, and my heart ached with the weight of unspoken words. So when the court informed her I would be moving in with my dad, the reaction was explosive. I swear, all hell broke loose. S accused me of ruining her life, saying the last 12 years had been hell because of me. "You've turned everyone against me," she screamed, her voice laced with bitterness, her face contorting into a mask of rage. She called me a sociopath, blaming me for her failed relationships and financial troubles. Her anger was a whirlwind, throwing words and objects around the room, and I stood there, trembling under the onslaught. The confrontation lasted 2 excruciating hours, and all I could do was stand there, numb, while she hurled insults like they were daggers. Each insult felt like it chipped away a piece of my soul, and I struggled to hold onto any shred of self-worth. It was as if the walls of my new life were closing in on me, threatening to suffocate me under the weight of her venomous words. After that chaotic confrontation, I moved in with my dad, believing that peace would finally be within reach. I thought I had escaped her grasp, but no. She stalked me, waiting outside my school, lurking in the shadows like a storm cloud threatening to burst. One day, I saw her waiting outside, her car parked just out of sight, and panic set in. I could feel my heart racing, my palms sweating, as I dialed my dad's number, desperately hoping he would answer. I needed to get away from her, to find safety in the chaos. Thankfully, he didn't pick up right away, but he called me back soon after, and I managed to dodge her that time, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. Despite my attempts to cut ties, she reached out through family friends, hoping to bridge the gap, but I blocked everyone. Each notification sent my heart racing with anxiety. I couldn't bear the thought of her worming her way back into my life. I knew it sounded harsh, but I was terrified of her. The emotional scars run deep, and every time I think about her, a wave of anxiety crashes over me. It was as if her presence loomed over me, a dark shadow that I could never fully escape. So, Reddit, AITA for going no contact with my mom? I genuinely feel like I'm protecting myself, but I can't shake the guilt that comes with cutting her off. I've often wondered if I'm making the right choice. On one hand, I feel liberated. On the other, I worry about the consequences of my decision. The thought of her spiraling deeper into her own darkness fills me with a sense of dread, but I also know that I have to prioritize my mental health and well-being. Am I wrong for wanting to sever those ties for my own peace of mind?